Hello and welcome to First Page Fridays. My name's Tom Levine, and with me is, as ever, is my lovely. What are you, my lovely?
You mean
In
in
this
this
context,
arena,
in this
in this
arena, my lovely
context?
partner, associate. I don't know, but she sells books like crazy. We are today doing. This is our First Page Fridays, which the idea, and I don't know if it's going to work or not, but the idea was to, for me, first of all, to take like original drafts of some of the novels that I've written and or published, because there's a difference between those two things, and critique the first page, which is a service that I actually offer on Fiverr also, because your first page can make or break whether you get an agent or not, or whether they're going to keep on reading. And you can generally tell, particularly if you're a reader also, which I'm sure most of you are, you can tell on the first page whether this person knows what the hell they're doing or not. It's really,
Mm.
really easy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to send in your first page, then feel free to do that. You can just email it to me at info@tomlevine.com, and that's the streamlined way, and you don't have to put your name on it or anything, or I won't say the name during the show, and we will read it out loud because this is also going to be an audio podcast when it all said and done, and then we're gonna rip it apart very kindly, but hopefully,
Constructively.
constructively. We want it to be constructive and productive.
Productively.
Yeah. Also, I should mention the first page that we will be looking at each week will be posted as either a document or a JPEG or something like that at tomlevine.com/Friday. And there will also be instructions there where you can learn how to download or upload your first page and stuff like that. tomlevine.com/Friday. We'll be updating it every week so you can get a head start and form your own opinions. Feel free. This is a group effort, so by all means, feel free to add your own comments and critiques as we go along because that's going to be part of the fun. Today's first page. This is the first sort of, it's not sort of a novel. It's more of a novella, but I think I calculated it out, and I believe it comes out to about 20,000 words or so. This was designed to be a series of course. You can't just write one fantasy novel. Of course, you have to write 18 of them, like George R. Jefferson or whatever his name is. I just wanted to throw that in there. And so this is book one of the Silver Sword Chronicle. So it's the Silver Sword Chronicles, book one. And so book one of the Silver Sword Chronicles is Darrow the Warrior, or the Demon Prince of Nine Hells. This is page one. Now, this is a little bit longer of a page one because it is single spaced, but I think it gives you the flavor. So imagine you are, put on your imagination caps, and imagine that you are an agent at one of the biggest fantasy agencies in the world or whatever, and this is what lands in your inbox. And that's all you know. You don't know anything about the author other than this is the story you've been given. The inn was filled with people, all of them eating, drinking, laughing, yelling, and quarreling, all except for a burly fighter clad in plate mail and a young boy dressed in common clothes. The warrior's war sword hung at his waist, and the boy had a dagger concealed in the folds of his tunic. Nearby, a man was knocked unconscious by a very angry dwarf. Nobody noticed. In the center of the table was a considerable amount of treasure: a large medallion, a golden armband, a pearl necklace, a silver bracelet, and a set of platinum and jewel earrings. Most had belonged to a goblin chieftain and his mate, but it was a large ruby that held the attention of the boy, Titch. The fighter, however, was watching the boy. His hands rested lightly on the table, his helmet lying close at hand. This helmet was an incredible thing, made of the best dwarven metal, seemingly done by works of magic. In a way, the dwarven smithship was magical. A dwarf had given it to the mighty warrior after he was saved from a vicious manticore. Soon, as the fighter expected, Titch began to reach toward the ruby, but his index finger had barely grazed the jewel when his wrist was caught firmly by the warrior. "Oh, come on, Darrow," Titch whined. "I'm the one who stole it." "Have you forgotten already, Titch, that it was I who battled the goblins?" Darrow asked him. "That's an historical question," Titch said after withdrawing his hand. "Rhetorical," Darrow corrected smoothly. "That's what I said." Darrow appeared to smile. "How about 20 gold pieces and a medallion for compensation?" he asked. "Well," Titch considered. "And the bracelet?" "All right," Titch agreed quickly, scooping up the newly gained treasure into his pouch. He had taken 23 gold pieces, but Darrow pretended not to notice. Just as Titch was tying his drawstrings shut, the innkeeper came up to the table. He surveyed Titch with distaste, then looked at Darrow. "That boy shouldn't be in here," he snarled. "He's not drinking," replied Darrow calmly. This wasn't totally true, but 4 sips doesn't count, does it? "I don't care," the keeper growled. "Fine," Darrow said. "We can take our gains elsewhere. Titch, let's go." And that is the end of page one of Darrow the Warrior.
Hmm.
Where to start? where to start. What did you notice? Did you notice anything, maybe?
I
What
did.
did you
I
notice?
did notice some things. I noticed that I don't read fantasy very often. And so there were a number of things that I was like, I don't know what that is.
Was it the Manticore?
Yes, that
Yes.
one, Manticore. I have no idea. I still don't.
But based on the title and the first page, did you know what you were getting into?
Yes.
See,
Yes.
that was one of the first things I wanted to bring up. On the positive side for this young man,
Mm-hmm.
is that there is no, I mean, regardless of the writing, before we dig too deep into the writing itself, there's no question what genre this falls into. That is super cool. That is a very important thing to do, to be able to establish, if we take away for a moment the cover, because it's one thing to put your book up on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or whatever, your local independent bookstore where people are looking at covers, versus sending a manuscript to an agent or an editor. You don't have the benefit of a cover. And even if, obviously, in your query letter, you will tell them what the genre is, that's fairly normal to do. But still, to establish a genre so quickly in the first page is really actually pretty cool and is very good. So kudos to.
Based on some of the descriptions early on, a burly fighter, he's a warrior, he's got a war sword, and yet he is using words like rhetorical.
Ooh.
And
Nice.
he seems very in command intellectually as well as physically.
Nice. Wow.
So good job, Tommy.
It's a good observation, though. You're right.
So yeah,
it reveals a lot about him, even in that first page.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, very nice.
Like right from the get-go. And obviously there is some kind of and this, then you can there's some kind of ongoing relationship between Darrow and, hang on, Darrow and Titch. But so no, those were the things that right off the bat, that there was clearly some kind of ongoing relationship between Darrow and Titch, and Darrow was not your typical, well, my assumption of what a typical fantasy warrior would be. I mean, he wasn't just a physical presence.
Wasn't just barbarian or something like that. Yeah,
Yes.
That makes sense. Those are very good observations. I like that.
She says it does seem very typical of the start of a D&D campaign. Oh my goodness.
He saw that?
Right? You've got the typical characters and their classes, and it starts out in an inn. Ha ha ha. That just seems fun.
Maybe Keep on the Borderlands, module B1 or B2. I can't remember which one it was.
Oh, no. See, and
Absolutely.
So this is where it's all about who your reader is, because I bring none of that.
Right.
But both Mary and Tabitha are like, oh, yes, I know exactly where we are.
Yeah.
They've got that orientation.
Right. So this isn't, so technically, I mean, we're not setting the book, of course, in, what is it, Ravenloft or Dragonlance or any of the D&D worlds or anything like that. But yeah, absolutely. Keep on the Borderlands. Dude, we played that. I literally fell apart. So yes, absolutely right. This is the start of your typical D&D adventure, because that's what we did. We played D&D.
All right.
Very quickly also, because it bears talking, you probably can't see that, but this is single spaced. Ooh, no, bad form. Don't single space. It's funny that still has to be mentioned, but it really does, because on Fiverr, I see a lot of these things every month, and it's like, ugh! Okay, first of all, before I even start, we need to talk about formatting. Double space, 12 point, New Times Roman or Times New Roman, whatever it is, 1 inch margins, ragged edge. That's you have to do these things. Anything, and if you don't, it's not necessarily an immediate pass. But boy, you're a whole lot closer to a pass than you were before if you'd formatted it properly. So bad formatting, Tom. You should have formatted differently.
Aww.
Interesting sidebar.
Yes.
I sent this book to DAW Books when I was probably 13 or 14. I was like, I'm going to see if they'll publish it. So I put that sucker in the mail, made another copy, dot matrix printer with the tractor paper we talked about. Took that shit off by hand. And sent it to DAW Books. I did, and I still have the rejection letter, because I got a personalized rejection letter from Jack somebody, I think.
Did you happen to put that you were 13 or 14?
I doubt it.
Okay.
I sincerely doubt it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I did. That seems unlikely to me. I don't have what I sent, but I do have the rejection letter from DAW. So now my life mission is to get published by DAW someday. So I'd be like, you know what? This is gonna be crazy, and
That's
maybe it'll be a rewrite of Darrow. I don't know.
uh
But I got a rejection, and one of the things that the thing that they sent back, and it's funny because you could see it was like an electric typewriter. So they'd taken a form letter and rolled it into their electric typewriter and typed out this little personal note at the
oh,
bottom, which
interesting.
is pretty cool
Mm-hmm.
for any, whether it's now or 30
Yeah.
years ago. Um, and it said this was not up to our submission standards, whatever it needs to be double spaced and no less than 50,000 words. And this is not 50,000. So I was like, oh. And it was one of those things where I wasn't upset. I didn't get mad at the rejection or anything because I didn't expect to get published or anything. I didn't
Right.
even know what that would mean if I did. But I remember opening it and going, oh, huh, okay. And like that's one of those very first lessons I had as an author, which wasn't going to come for another 30 years or 20 some odd years, whatever it was. Like, oh, double space. Okay, good to
Right.
know.
Because now there's something productive there.
Yes.
You know some of their requirements and
Yeah.
whatnot. And
Oh,
like,
yeah. The follow up to that part, though, is I then.
Oh no.
So, I mean, we had a word processor, of course, to get my dot matrix printer. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to double space. So I fired up the document, put that cursor between the and in, and hit the space bar. And the next word, space bar twice.
No,
Space bar.
you didn't.
I didn't know it meant like skip a line. I meant double
Oh,
spaces
no.
in between each word. And I must have spent hours doing that. Just tap, tap. God damn it. Tap, tap. This is how do they do this?
Thomas.
And then at one point, because the computer was in our living room, and my dad's watching football or whatever, and after several hours of this, he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, this editor said I need to double space everything," and he's like, "What?" Like, yeah, I have to put double spaces in between all the words, and he starts laughing his ass off. My dad never laughed a lot, but that night he laughed hysterically as he tried to explain what that meant, and it finally sank in. I was like, "Oh, okay. I gotta go back to every one of these double spaces and delete them now."
Oh.
Lesson learned. So we've got a couple of good things going on here, young sir. We're firmly rooted in a genre, which is great. I think actually going back to Tabitha and Mary talking about the D&D thing, that's I think that's a good thing fundamentally because then there's no question. And on the one hand, speaking as a from what no, I've not published fantasy yet. I certainly hope to one day. So I don't know all the ins and outs and vagaries of fantasy publishing as it stands right now, and of course it'll change tomorrow. So who knows? Um, but for the most part, given my experience in publishing, I would argue that having it rooted in something like that that's so clearly, I don't want to say rip off of D&D necessarily, but like, oh, it was immediately recognizable. So if you're shopping and you pick this up and you like the cover, which inevitably is going to have one of these, Frazetta paintings on the front or whatever, and then you read that first page, you are going to know exactly what you're getting into, and that is a good thing. And some writers I run into, I think, worry, and I see this online a lot, where they were like, "Well, but I'm narrowing my audience." Yes, good. You should narrow your audience. You want to niche down as far as you can and get those hardcore fans. Worry about the millions and millions of people later, and because it's statistically not going to happen.
Right.
But if you can make 1,000 people or 5,000 people or 10,000 people super delighted because, oh my God, it's that cool D&D book, you're done. You're good. You've got it. So I would not necessarily dissuade this writer from so clearly kind of rooting himself or herself in such a specific genre like that, if that makes sense. I think that's a good thing to do. And it's good for the agents too, because then they can go, the Darrow, the really want, nope, not for me. And they can move on to the next thing. And that's good. What you want is the agent who's like, ooh, this looks like a D&D book. That's your goal. That's what you want. And you only need one. You only need one. Yeah. I actually dedicated this to my dad because he read it as I was writing it, and he gave me a couple ideas. And one of the ideas he gave me actually takes place later in the book. The execution was poor, but his suggestion was spot on, and that was like a D&D, especially the 80s D&D. I don't know if it's changed, probably hasn't. It was kind of like get in a fight, rest, and count your gold. Get in a fight, rest, and count your gold. Like it was just this ongoing. It wasn't really that different. After you play for a couple years, you've already done all there is to do, kind of, unless you've got a really good DM who's a good storyteller. And so one of the things that was happening in the book is they'd get in a fight and they'd win, and they'd go on to the next thing, and they'd get in a fight and they'd win, and it was just constantly till the end of the book. So yes, very reminiscent of D&D. And at some point, my dad was after as he's reading, he's like, all this guy does, and kind of goes back to your acknowledging that Darrow seems to be a pretty bright character. He's like, all they do is fight. Can you have him use his mind once in a while? And I was like, yeah, I think I will. So I incorporated that. Now, again, the execution of him using his mind wasn't all that well written, but I do think the advice was absolutely sound. That to have a well-rounded character, particularly if we're going to have any kind of action hero, whether that's modern thriller, fantasy, whatever, is to really give them more than just swinging a sword. So that was good advice on my dad's part, I think. You can see this very clearly on the website, tomlevine.com/Friday, if you need a closer look. If you go there, you will notice something that is very distinctly still me, if you've read any of my other novels, short paragraphs. This thing clips along. There's no big hunk and chunks of dialogue or description. It's just short paragraph, short paragraph. I think the biggest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 lines is about the biggest paragraph, and even after that, it's like 5s and then 1s and 2s. So the pacing is actually quite good, and again, this is something I've continued to do throughout my writing style. It's just I write short paragraphs and like to keep things moving, so I appreciate that. However, the dialogue tags are a lot of them. So you just on page 1, we've got Titch whined, Darrow asked, Darrow corrected smoothly, he asked, Titch considered, Titch agreed quickly, he snarled, replied Darrow calmly, Keeper growled, Darrow said. That is way too many tags for page 1, even if we double space it and call it page 2.
Sure.
That's way, way, way too many. I appreciate that one of the lines here, actually there's a couple places where I didn't even have a tag because it's just the 2 characters. Rhetorical, Darrow corrected smoothly. That's what I said. We know who's talking. Great habit to get into. If you don't have to identify him, just let him say it and keep moving.
Right.
So I do appreciate that. But if I was to sit down with this young sir, I would say that you don't need that many tags. And you certainly, basically every time you use something other than said, the mind takes just this little tiny hiccup, and that slows the pace down just a little bit. And then you run into these adverb things, right? ly is adverb, right? I think?
Yes.
Yeah. You run into the adverb problem of smoothly and what are the other ones? Calmly, all this kind of stuff. Generally, like Stephen King talks a lot about that. Like we need to get rid of those. And then there's some authors who are like, you know what? Shut up, Stephen King. They're words. We do what we want. And they're both right, is the thing. There's a time and a place to say calmly or firmly or whatever. I try to avoid them as much as I can now, but having the adverbs, particularly when we're talking about dialogue tags, should be part of the voice of the novel, though. In this case, it kind of is part of the voice of the novel, but it's a voice that needs some work. Voice doesn't mean you get a pass. You know what I mean? Like voice means it's good that you have one and that it's distinct, but that it could still use some professional development, I guess. So that jumps out at me a little bit, that kind of thing.
On the comment of tags, I thought maybe that might be a thing. I'll tell you the one I appreciated was Darrow correcting smoothly. There was something in that piece of the exchange that if he had just, so I mean, you could have obviously said Darrow said, but if you had kept Darrow corrected just on its own, there's a little more that takes me in one direction for his character, whereas corrected smoothly took me in a different path that was a little less school marm-ish.
Yeah.
If I may apply those words to Darrow.
I think you may. I will
warrior.
Give you permission. That's a good observation. No, I think you're right. I think that illustrates the point. There's a time and a place to do that because that gives it more information upon which to judge the character or base an impression. And I think you're right.
Right.
That might be something that should be allowed.
That piece, right.
Yeah.
Right. That piece I felt told me more about him. Whereas to your point, to the other ones, considered, complained, whined. Like, I don't need to know that you don't need to say that he whined for me to know that he's whining.
He's probably whining.
I don't know if I would have realized that as a kid reading this book, but as a parent, I absolutely know the tone. There's not a question.
It doesn't matter what world we're on.
No.
A boy sounds like this.
Particularly when he's sitting at a table with an adult. Right? I mean, you know
Because
what
there's
I'm
no
talking
crayons
about.
or nothing there. He doesn't get like a little
Right.
placemat.
He's not even allowed to touch the treasure. You know, like Darrow's like smacking his hand away. You know, like yeah.
Oh my god, I'm so
I
glad
know
you're
this
here.
sound.
This is good. One of the things that jumps out at me reading this as an adult, and could be a matter of taste. Now we've established that yes, very much inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. Cool, not a problem. And in Dungeons and Dragons, it's probably not unusual for somebody to walk in full plate mail armor and sword and sit down at a table and dump their treasure in the middle of it. Okay, we'll let that go if you've got a pretty relaxed DM. In a novel, in a, a short story where the genre is fantasy, but we still want to root it in some kind of reality, I think. That could be a personal thing. I don't know. I didn't read Game of Thrones. I didn't even finish Lord of the Rings, frankly. I just couldn't. I read The Hobbit and then couldn't get into the first Lord of the Rings book.
We'll allow it.
So thank you.
Tonight, yeah.
So I don't know if that's a typical thing in other genres, or if the D&D novels themselves tended to be a little bit more just like, oh, we just accept that he's wearing full plate. Personally, as a reader, I would have loved to see more like, why is he still wearing plate mail? Because that's not just like something you slap on. Like that's multiple layers of stuff, and it's hard to move. And like so the sword is at his waist, and I assume they're sitting. So how the hell is he maneuvering with his sword? You know what I'm saying? So that part kind of jumps out at me. Like, all right, so if he's gonna wear it, cool, but then give me a taste of it. There aren't many senses in this first page. We see a lot. It's all visual, which is normal, totally normal. But like, what does the inn smell like? Is it lovely, like bacon? Oh, okay, cool, it's bacon. Or is it like spilt beer and
mutton? No, I mean, yeah, like what's the?
Give me some other textures and flavors and smells and stuff in this. What's it feel like to be in that armor? So he's sitting there going, "Good Lord, I gotta get upstairs and get this thing off after a hard day slaying goblins."
The sweat down his face.
Right? How does that armor smell? Now, again, personal opinion. That's just my taste. I would have liked to seen some more realism, quote unquote, in this, because I think that will endear us to the characters even more, and to make comparisons, that people who have not perhaps grown up in a fantasy world can be like, oh yeah, that would suck, or whatever. Give us a little bit more there. We don't know. So we've got the warrior's great sword hangs at his waist, and the boy had a dagger concealed in the folds of his tunic. Cool. Is he gonna use it pretty soon? This is the don't put a rifle over the mantle in chapter 1. It better go off by chapter 3. It's the whole Chekhov's gun thing. Why are we talking about the war sword and the dagger? Like the sword, I can kind of accept like that's for work. He's got stuff to do. He's killing goblins, but why point out
as if he was pulling out a laptop?
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, that's sort of seems weird to me. But I'll accept it with the warrior. But then you've got this kid that you go out of your way to give us a whole sentence, whole line of real estate used up to tell us about the dagger concealed in the folds of his tunic. Like, you gonna do something with that? And I can tell you right now, no, he doesn't. Not anytime soon.
Big reveal.
Yeah, big reveal. Sorry, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. Spoiler alert for when the movie comes out. It's also interesting that and this is not bad or wrong, it's just an interesting choice, I think, that this is third person omniscient. So we're in both of these characters' minds, which I think, it's doable. You can do it. There's nothing wrong with it. I would advise the writer to consider going back and choosing a perspective, even if you're going to go back and bounce back and forth between them, which the book ends up doing a little bit. But third person omniscient, there's nothing wrong with it. It's completely legit. It's completely acceptable, but I think it's a little cluttered. And I think it's too much for the reader to kind of absorb, and we want to keep the reader kind of laser focused on something specific. So I don't have a personal preference about first person or third person. I think third is sort of the default in fantasy, at least it used to be. Whereas like YA, it's frequently first person.
Right.
Do whatever you got to do there, but the omniscient part is kind of like, it's a little cluttered. It just feels a little cluttered to me, especially if it's going to be a whole novel like that. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that almost worse than is that it's not consistent. So if you're gonna do omniscient in chapter 1, then you better keep being omniscient through the whole story. And instead, what the author does is kind of bounces back and forth. Sometimes it's Darrow, and sometimes it's Titch, and then sometimes it's omniscient again. It's like, yeah, that's a hard thing to do. Like, I give you a pass because you're 13, but all of us have to do that. Because I will mix up my past and present in one manuscript and then have to go back and change one or the other.
Sure.
It's crazy. So bouncing in and out of omniscient and more of a focused, I think happens very easily.
Yes.
Yeah. Can be hard to catch in the revision phase. So,
mm-hmm.
But that's something I would encourage him to think about in the future. Whose story is this? Now, clearly it's theirs.
Yes, and based on your title, I think it's Darrow's.
You would think so.
Your title has given me that. I will say the dagger in the folds of his tunic, immediately clicked in my head of like, well, how do we know that it's hidden in the folds? Like, I went to a point of view thing with that sentence.
That's bad.
Of like, how do we know that?
Yeah.
I mean, I was also reading it because I knew we were going to critique it. So, I mean,
that's one of those things that's a hiccup, and you don't want readers ever. Right. You want to make as seamless as possible.
As few hiccups
as possible, because that's one of those things where it's like, doink. And it might not pull you out of the book. For some readers, it does. For some readers, they're looking for a reason to put the book down.
Right.
They got, just like you guys, and just like us, they have a stack of books on their nightstand, and they're not going to tolerate any crap. So even a minor thing like that can be like, something didn't feel right. I'm not even sure. Like, you picked out what it was for you.
Right.
Other readers might not pick out what it is, but they would know, like, this isn't working. I don't know what it is. So
move on.
Yeah, move on. Something to be aware of.
All right.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Because I thought the drinking thing also pulled me out a little bit, honestly, though, because that felt like so modern. Like, this is a fantasy inn, and they have a legal drinking age. Like, where's your ID? Like, no.
No, see, I didn't bump on in terms of like a legal drinking age necessarily, but just that clearly this is a child-ish, and like probably not the thing he should be doing.
That's fair. Yeah.
But no, that's
just seemed
a legit, like, really, do we need to point that out? Like, yeah.
Like, there was other ways. I think that it's because Darrow brings up the drinking aspect. It's not the innkeeper who brings it up. So having Darrow maybe take that in a different direction, or maybe because I mean we don't know. We did like in the second paragraph, we've got a guy getting knocked out by a dwarf. Like, so this is
nobody cares.
And nobody cares. Like, whatever. Like, and you can see it in the movie, like, and see this whole thing kind of in the background, and these two guys being like, Ruby, like, which is cool. That's a good detail, I think. It sets us in a place and it roots us in the moment, which is cool. But then I could have used maybe a little more or something like that. So yeah, we'll put something up on the site, but if you want to read it in advance, again, it'll be tomlevine.com/Friday. You can see that. I'll probably be up tomorrow or Sunday, or maybe even Monday, but it will be up before we come back. I think that's it. Do you have anything?
No. Thanks for coming to play.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.